Daniel Carter had everything that a man of 35 could dream of. A polished career as a rising partner at Horizon Law Firm in Boston, a reputation built on sharp intellect, and a lifestyle cushioned by wealth and tradition. Born into an old New England family, his path had been paved with elite schools, yacht clubs, and social circles that valued uniformity above diversity. Among his many unspoken codes of conduct, one belief clung stubbornly to his identity. He swore he would never date a Latina woman. To Daniel, this preference felt harmless, just another part of his carefully crafted image. Yet, beneath the surface, it was more than a private choice. It was an invisible barrier, a reflection of inherited prejudice disguised as personal taste. A wall that kept entire worlds, entire possibilities, locked firmly outside his view. In conversations with colleagues or friends at the country club, Daniel often laughed about his type. Tall blondes, refined backgrounds, women who mirrored the same narrow upbringing he knew so well. When asked about Latina women, he would shrug casually, claiming they were simply not his style. His words carried the ring of detachment, but underneath was something more insidious. He thought of it as a standard, a boundary that defined his world. Yet every casual remark he made reinforced a stereotype, perpetuating an ignorance that he never paused to question. To his friends, it was just locker room banter, another glass of scotch over shallow jokes. But in truth, every word built a stronger wall around his heart, sealing him off from experiences that might challenge his identity. Daniel believed he was immune to such questions. He saw himself as sophisticated, immune to change. Life at Horizon Law Firm only reinforced his convictions. The boardrooms were filled with men who looked and thought like him, clients who came from the same manicured suburbs, and cases that spoke more to financial empire than community need. Diversity was a word reserved for annual charity events. Inclusion existed only in glossy brochures meant for investors. Daniel thrived in this environment. He believed it validated his worldview, confirming that success was built on tradition, on staying within familiar lines. His future appeared mapped out. Promotions, more influence, perhaps marriage to someone who would blend seamlessly into his pedigree. What Daniel never realized was how fragile this certainty was. It would take just one presence, one unexpected arrival, to fracture the neat image he had built for himself. And that fracture, though small at first, would change the course of his life forever. The morning Isabella Rivera first walked into Horizon Law Firm, the Boston skyline was painted in gold. The city seemed to hum with possibility, though Daniel Carter hardly noticed. He was reviewing briefs in the glass-walled conference room, preparing to dominate yet another meeting, when the door opened. She stepped in with an air of quiet confidence, her dark curls framing a face alive with focus, her eyes carrying both warmth and authority. At 29, Isabella had already earned acclaim as an urban designer, known for reshaping neglected neighborhoods into thriving spaces. Now, she had been hired as a consultant to bridge the gap between legal strategy and cultural insight, a role few understood but all would soon respect. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, as if absorbing her presence. Even Daniel, who rarely lost composure, felt something shift deep within him. Introductions moved swiftly, names exchanged across the table, but Isabella's voice lingered in the air, rich, steady, and commanding without effort. She spoke of her background in Texas, of community projects that had won national recognition, and of her belief that architecture and law must serve people, not just power. Some nodded politely, others dismissed her as a diversity hire, but she never faltered. Daniel, from his polished seat at the far end, masked his reaction with a professional smile. Yet beneath it, his thoughts tangled. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered in his firm, direct, unapologetic, brilliant. He told himself it was only admiration for her credentials, nothing more. Still, he couldn't ignore the unsettling energy in the room. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't the one setting the tone. Isabella had, without trying, stolen the spotlight. After the meeting, whispers buzzed through the corridors. Who was this young Latina consultant who dared to speak with such authority? Some speculated she wouldn't last, that Horizon's culture would grind her down. Others quietly admitted she might be exactly what the firm needed. Daniel remained in his office, staring at the skyline but seeing only her face, her presence replaying in his mind, like a challenge he hadn't asked for. It wasn't just her beauty, though undeniable. It was the clarity in her words, the way she carried a world outside his own narrow circle into the heart of Horizon's marble halls. He tried to bury the thought, convincing himself that she was irrelevant to his carefully drawn life. Yet somewhere, beneath layers of pride and prejudice, a crack had begun to form. He didn't know it yet, but nothing would be the same. The first real clash came sooner than anyone expected. A week after Isabella's arrival, Horizon hosted a critical strategy meeting for a civic redevelopment project. Daniel entered the boardroom with his usual air of authority. He was prepared, precise, and fully confident that his proposal would be accepted without question. His legal framework was airtight, at least in his eyes. When he finished presenting, silence filled the room, broken only by Isabella's calm voice. "Your design is efficient, Daniel," she began, her tone respectful yet firm, "but it doesn't acknowledge the culture of the community it's meant to serve." Heads turned instantly. No one challenged Daniel Carter in public, certainly not someone new. He felt a flicker of irritation, but Isabella continued, outlining overlooked perspectives and missed opportunities that revealed cracks in his perfect plan. For once, Daniel was caught off guard. His instinct was to dismiss her critique, brushing it aside as a secondary issue. Yet the confidence in her delivery silenced his retort. She walked to the whiteboard, sketching alternative ideas, weaving in community spaces that Daniel had not considered: parks, gathering areas, places that fostered connection instead of just efficiency. Colleagues leaned forward, intrigued by her vision. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was accustomed to respect, deference, even awe. Instead, he felt the spotlight sliding away, replaced by her calm brilliance. "This isn't about quotas," Isabella concluded, turning back to the group. "It's about building something that lasts, because it belongs to the people." The room buzzed with quiet approval. Daniel's pride burned. No one had spoken to him that way before. Yet beneath the sting, something else stirred admiration for her courage, her clarity, and her refusal to be silenced. That night, long after the meeting ended, Daniel replayed every moment in his mind. He tried to frame his frustration as professional. How dare she undermine him in front of colleagues? But the truth gnawed at him. Isabella had not embarrassed him. She had revealed his blind spots. For years, he prided himself on mastery, on seeing what others overlooked. Now, a newcomer had challenged his vision and won respect without raising her voice. Alone in his apartment, glass of scotch untouched, Daniel admitted what he would never say aloud. He was intrigued. Her ideas unsettled him. Her confidence unnerved him, and her presence lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. He told himself it was irritation, nothing more. Yet deep down, he knew it was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that could dismantle the life he thought unshakable. The days following their clash carried an unusual tension. Daniel found himself glancing toward Isabella's office more often than he cared to admit, sometimes catching her deep in thought, sketching on a legal pad as though the world outside didn't exist. He told himself it was curiosity, professional interest at best, but the truth gnawed at him. He was fascinated. For years, his colleagues had praised him, rarely daring to question his authority. Isabella had done so without hesitation, and somehow he respected her for it. Each time their paths crossed in the hallways, a flicker of unspoken challenge passed between them. Daniel's carefully drawn boundaries, rules about the kind of women he dated, the kind of voices he allowed into his circle began to blur. He didn't understand why, but the certainty he once wore like armor no longer fit quite so perfectly. One evening, Daniel stopped by Isabella's office under the guise of offering assistance. Papers were scattered across her desk, awards tucked neatly on the shelves, evidence of a career built on merit rather than chance. "Need any help settling in?" he asked casually. masking the nerves in his tone. Isabella looked up, her gaze steady. "Thank you, but no, I'm here to work, not to prove that I belong." Her words landed like a quiet thunderclap. For years, Daniel had dismissed diversity hires as tokens, symbols of progress without substance. Yet here was a woman whose talent was undeniable, whose presence demanded respect without compromise. He fumbled for words, assuring her he hadn't meant otherwise, but her polite smile suggested she saw through him. That single exchange unsettled him more deeply than any courtroom battle. It forced him to confront truths he had long ignored. That night, Daniel walked home through Boston's cobblestone streets, the city lights reflecting in the Charles River. He replayed Isabella's words, the conviction in her voice, the subtle steel beneath her grace. He realized how shallow his old remarks to friends sounded now, flippant jokes about who he would or wouldn't date, words that once seemed harmless but now burned with shame. For the first time, he wondered if his so-called standards were nothing more than inherited prejudice, a cage he had mistaken for freedom. Sleep eluded him as he sat by his window, staring at the skyline. He thought of Isabella not just as a colleague, but as a mirror one that reflected the uncomfortable parts of himself he had never dared to examine. And though he didn't yet understand it fully, Daniel knew one thing: the boundaries he had sworn to keep were beginning to break. It didn't take long for whispers to spread through Horizon's sleek corridors. Isabella's presence, her undeniable talent, and her fearless opinions had unsettled the usual rhythm. Some colleagues muttered that she was only there to satisfy a diversity quota. Others dismissed her ideas as too community-focused for high-profile clients. Daniel overheard fragments of conversations in the break room, careless words spoken with a smirk, and for the first time in his career, they bothered him. In the past, he might have laughed along or stayed silent, believing it wasn't his place to intervene. But now, silence felt complicit. As he poured himself a coffee, his jaw tightened at the remarks. "She'll fade out soon. Just a token face." The words stung not because they were about Isabella, but because they echoed the very judgments he himself had once made without hesitation. The breaking point came during a late afternoon meeting. Two junior associates, emboldened by the casual bias in the air, joked that Isabella's design suggestions were colorful but impractical. Laughter rippled through the room, faint but sharp enough to cut. Isabella remained composed, though a shadow flickered across her face. Before she could respond, Daniel's voice cut through the noise, low and firm. "Enough." The room fell silent, every eye turning toward him. "At this firm, we judge by talent and work ethic, not by assumptions or prejudice. Is that clear?" His tone left no room for argument. The associates stammered apologies, their confidence crumbling under his stare. Isabella glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. For years, Daniel had thrived on authority, yet this time, his authority carried a new weight, not dominance, but defense. It was a line he never imagined himself crossing. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his office, the city's twilight bleeding into the glass windows. He knew he had done the right thing, yet the moment replayed in his mind with uneasy clarity. He had defended colleagues before, but never against the very bias he had once shared. The irony was bitter, but also revealing. He wasn't proud of the past, nor did he expect forgiveness for it, but for the first time, he felt determined to act differently. Isabella passed by on her way out, pausing at his door. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes steady. He nodded, unable to form words. It was a small moment, but it cracked something open inside him. Publicly, he had taken a stand. Privately, he was beginning to accept that the boundaries of his old world had already been rewritten. By the third week, Isabella's presence had become the quiet storm at Horizon. The hallways hummed with speculation, colleagues exchanging sidelong glances whenever she passed. Her talent was undeniable. Yet, the whispers persisted. She's here because of quotas. She won't last long. In the past, Daniel might have laughed with them, or worse, added his own smug comment. But now, each word he overheard grated like sand in an open wound. During one break-room exchange, two senior associates scoffed at her recent proposal, calling it window dressing for the firm's image. Daniel, pouring coffee nearby, felt his hand tighten around the pot. He had once believed such assumptions were harmless truths. Now, they sounded like poison. He realized with growing unease that the prejudice he was hearing was not only theirs, it had once been his own. The moment of reckoning came during a crowded project meeting. Isabella had just presented a series of community-focused amendments when a junior lawyer smirked and muttered, "Pretty sketches, but clients won't care." A ripple of laughter followed, low but sharp. Isabella's lips pressed together, her composure intact, though the sting was visible in her eyes. Before she could respond, Daniel leaned forward, his voice cutting clean through the noise. Enough. Silence fell. He met every gaze in the room with steel. At Horizon, we measure value by talent and integrity, not by lazy stereotypes. If that's unclear, you don't belong at this table. The room shifted uncomfortably. The young lawyer flushed crimson, stammering an apology. Colleagues exchanged startled looks. Daniel Carter, who had once embodied the old guard, was now defending the very woman many believed he would dismiss. That night, as Boston's skyline flickered against the Charles River, Daniel sat alone in his office, the meeting replaying in his mind. His entire career had thrived on silence, on letting subtle prejudices pass unchecked, believing they weren't his responsibility. But today, silence had felt like betrayal. He wasn't proud of who he had been, nor did he expect redemption from one public defense, but he knew something had shifted. Isabella appeared at his door, coat over her arm, pausing just long enough to say, "Thank you." Her tone was calm, but her eyes carried weight, acknowledgement, maybe even respect. Daniel nodded, words failing him. When the door clicked shut, he exhaled slowly, realizing this was more than a single moment. In defending her, he had crossed an invisible line, one that separated the man he had been from the man he was struggling to become. Late nights at Horizon became common as deadlines tightened. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Daniel noticed Isabella's light still glowing across the hall. Papers and models were spread across her desk, her brow furrowed with concentration. For a moment, he hovered at his door, debating whether to interrupt. Finally, he stepped in. "You're still here?" he asked. She looked up, offering a small smile. "Deadlines don't wait." He nodded, moving closer. For years, Daniel had built walls of formality, never lingering longer than necessary with colleagues. Yet tonight felt different. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was alive, charged with something he couldn't name. For the first time, he realized that behind her professional strength was also dedication, discipline, and a quiet resilience that unsettled and inspired him in equal measure. As the hours passed, they leaned over the same documents, exchanging ideas with surprising ease. Isabella sketched adjustments to community layouts. Daniel suggested legal frameworks to support them. Their collaboration felt organic, as though they were balancing each other without effort. At one point, Isabella leaned back, stretching. "You know," she said softly, "most people expect me to prove I belong. You didn't make it easy either." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He remembered his careless words to friends, his inherited arrogance. "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't. But I see things differently now." Isabella studied him for a moment, her gaze steady, then returned to her notes. No smile, no forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Yet that simple silence felt heavier, more honest than 1,000 words. Daniel realized that change wasn't about declarations. It was about showing up, moment by moment. When they finally packed up near midnight, the office was hushed, the city lights shimmering against the glass. Walking together toward the parking garage, Daniel felt a strange reluctance to let the night end. "Your ideas tonight, they were brilliant," he said quietly. Isabella glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. Thank you. But brilliance won't matter if people only see me as a symbol. Daniel hesitated before replying. Then I'll make sure they see more. She didn't answer, but her footsteps slowed, as if weighing his words. At her car, she paused. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Isabella. As she drove away, he stood still, the echo of her presence lingering. The wall between them wasn't gone, it still loomed, high and uncertain. But for the first time, cracks had formed, and through them, light was beginning to pour. The night of the Horizon Charity Gala shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished smiles. Boston's elite gathered in the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, each guest scanning the room for connections as much as for conversation. Daniel Carter arrived early, perfectly composed, the image of a partner on the rise. Yet beneath the bow tie and tailored suit, his mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing toward the entrance, waiting. When Isabella finally walked in, time seemed to hesitate. She wore a floor-length emerald dress that caught the light with every step. Her curls swept elegantly over one shoulder. Conversations paused as eyes turned. Admiration mixed with whispers. To Daniel, it was more than her beauty. It was the confidence she radiated, the way she walked into a room that had never expected her and made it her own. As the evening unfolded, Isabella presented Horizon's new civic project, her words weaving a vision of inclusivity and transformation. Applause thundered when she finished, yet Daniel noticed the undercurrent subtle comments exchanged behind champagne glasses, skeptical glances from old money donors. He overheard his longtime friend James scoff, whispering, "Your firm's poster girl is impressive, though not exactly your type. Didn't you once say?" Daniel's chest tightened. The past he had tried to bury surfaced like a ghost. Shame burned as he remembered his careless words about never dating a Latina woman. Before he could reply, James excused himself, drink in hand, leaving Daniel standing alone with the weight of his hypocrisy. He realized, with painful clarity, that silence was no longer an option. If he truly respected Isabella, he couldn't remain the man who had once mocked her existence. He had to choose. Later, as Isabella mingled with colleagues, James approached her, his smile edged with condescension. Daniel crossed the room before words could spill, his voice steady but sharp. "Isabella, you were extraordinary tonight," he said, making sure everyone nearby heard. Her eyes flickered in surprise, then softened. James raised a brow, mocking. "Since when do you champion diversity?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Since I realized talent speaks louder than prejudice. Isabella isn't here to decorate Horizon. She's here to transform it." A hush spread, eyes turning toward them. Isabella held her composure, but Daniel saw the flicker of emotion in her gaze. For the first time, he had defended her not in whispers or behind closed doors, but in the open, where it mattered most. The gala continued, but for Daniel, everything had changed. His public mask had cracked, revealing a man no longer afraid to stand beside her. The morning after the gala, Horizon's office buzzed with unusual energy. Articles were already circulating online. Partner Daniel Carter defends Latina consultant at Gala. Some praised his courage, others mocked it as a performance. The weight of scrutiny pressed in from every direction. In the elevator, Daniel overheard whispers. He's only protecting her because he's infatuated. It won't last. At his desk, emails piled up, some congratulatory, others warning him to tread carefully. For the first time, Daniel felt the cost of standing on the opposite side of his peers. Yet what stung most wasn't their criticism. It was the reminder that he had once spoken the same words, laughed at the same prejudices. Now, they were turned against him. And Isabella? She carried herself with her usual poise, though Daniel noticed the coolness in her eyes. She wasn't sure whether to trust his transformation. That evening, Daniel visited his family for Sunday dinner, an obligation he rarely skipped. His mother, elegant and poised, poured him a glass of wine before asking, "I heard about your speech last night. Defending the new hire, was it?" Her tone was measured, but the undercurrent was sharp. Across the table, his sister Ivy watched intently, her journalist instincts ready to cut through pretense. "Mother," Daniel began carefully. "I stood up because it was right." Ivy leaned in, eyes narrowed. "Or because you're trying to rewrite the things you used to say?" "I remember." "Daniel, you didn't exactly hide your views back then." Silence settled, heavy and damning. He swallowed hard, realizing his family knew the truth. He had not only let himself down, but them as well. His words at the gala had been bold, but now he had to prove they weren't hollow. At Horizon, the fallout was equally relentless. Clients questioned whether the firm was becoming too political. A longtime partner pulled Daniel aside, warning him that public declarations could damage their reputation. "You need to remember," the partner said sternly. "Our clients value tradition, not disruption." Daniel listened, but inside, defiance sparked. He could no longer stomach the old language of caution and compromise. Still, doubts gnawed at him. Did Isabella believe he was sincere, or did she think he was posturing to ease his own guilt? One afternoon, as he passed her office, he caught her gaze. She didn't look angry, but she didn't look convinced either. "You can't change overnight," she had told him once, and now her words echoed louder than ever. Daniel knew she was right. Redemption required more than speeches. It demanded action and a consistency he had never truly lived. In the weeks that followed, Daniel refused to let his public defense at the gala remain a solitary gesture. He immersed himself in projects that forced him out of his comfort zone, starting with the Jefferson Avenue redevelopment, a case most partners saw as low profile because it centered on a predominantly Latino neighborhood. Daniel, however, insisted Isabella lead the design consultation, publicly praising her expertise. Some colleagues accused him of favoritism. Others rolled their eyes. Daniel didn't flinch. For once, he wasn't chasing prestige. He was chasing authenticity. At community board meetings, he listened instead of talking, sometimes staying quiet for hours as residents voiced concerns. Their stories humbled him. Families fighting displacement, children without safe spaces to play, elders yearning for dignity in the neighborhoods they had built. For Daniel, it was no longer about contracts. It was about people. Isabella noticed, even if she didn't say so. Beyond the office, Daniel began educating himself in ways that surprised even him. He devoured books on racial equity, attended public lectures at Boston University, and engaged in late-night debates with his sister Ivy, who pushed him to confront his blind spots. At first, the learning felt uncomfortable, like peeling away armor he had worn his entire life. But slowly, the discomfort became clarity. One Saturday, he accompanied Isabella to a neighborhood forum. Instead of arriving in his tailored suit, he wore casual slacks and rolled sleeves, blending in rather than standing apart. As Isabella spoke with community leaders, Daniel sat with teenagers sketching their vision for parks and cultural centers. He offered no speeches, no condescension, just presence. When an elderly woman clasped his hand, saying, "We've never had someone like you listen before," Daniel felt a quiet shift. Listening, he realized, was its own kind of courage. Back at Horizon, Daniel's choices drew both criticism and quiet admiration. Some partners whispered that he was losing his edge, but younger associates began approaching him for advice, inspired by his willingness to step outside tradition. Isabella, meanwhile, watched with measured caution. She saw him speak up when colleagues slipped into bias, saw him redirect praise toward her when clients overlooked her contributions. One evening, after a long planning session, she lingered in his office doorway. "You're different," she said simply, her tone neither accusatory nor forgiving, just observant. Daniel met her gaze. Not different, becoming. For the first time, her expression softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the wall she had carefully built. It wasn't surrender, nor was it complete trust. But it was a beginning. And for Daniel, that fragile opening meant more than any verdict he had ever won in court. The Jefferson Avenue Community Center opened under clear autumn skies, a space that pulsed with energy and laughter. Families spilled into the plaza, Children darted across the new play areas, and elders settled comfortably on benches built for gathering. Daniel stood quietly at the edge, watching Isabella greet community leaders with the same grace she had shown since her first day at Horizon. Cameras flashed, reporters circled, but none of it mattered to him. What mattered was the realization that his transformation was real, not for recognition, not for applause, but for the people who now had a place to belong. For Daniel, the center symbolized more than architecture. It represented the walls within himself that had finally come down. In Isabella's smile, he saw not only validation, but the life he had almost denied himself, all because of a prejudice he once called preference. That evening, Horizon received the Urban Vision Award for the project. The ballroom erupted in cheers, but when Daniel reached the stage, he deflected the spotlight. This recognition belongs to Isabella Rivera and the voices of the community who shaped this dream, he declared. The audience hushed, then thundered with applause. Isabella's eyes met his, shining with pride and something deeper. For years, Daniel had been the man who controlled rooms with cold precision. Tonight, he spoke with vulnerability. Great work, he continued, isn't built on walls of tradition. It's built on courage, compassion, and the willingness to change. It was not the speech of a lawyer protecting his image, but of a man laying his heart bare. The industry, the press, even his family would remember that moment, not for what was won, but for what was confessed. Later, away from the crowd, Daniel and Isabella stood by the Charles River, the city's lights flickering on the water. You told me once people don't change overnight, he said softly. You were right, but you made me want to change every day. Isabella's hand found his, her touch steady. It wasn't me, she whispered. It was you choosing to see. In that quiet, he realized the journey was never about proving himself to her. It was about becoming the man who could finally live without fear of his own truth. For the first time, Daniel no longer carried the weight of his old words. He carried hope. With Isabella beside him, the future stretched open, not as a path pre-written by privilege, but as a story they would write together. It was not the end. It was the beginning of something lasting. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Touch for more short stories filled with love, transformation, and life lessons. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the journey, and comment below to share your thoughts. We love hearing your reflections and experiences. Remember to turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And most importantly, share this story with friends or family who might need a reminder that change, courage, and love can rewrite any past. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. Your support keeps these stories alive.